Welcome to the Michael Mama Show, Ancient Secrets Revealed. We're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. And we got something a little different here for you today. We've been going over the Brahma Sutras and the Shiva Sutras, the Upanishads, and things like that. And I thought, and Scotty, you seem to feel the same way, that it'd be good to kind of take a more practical perspective on, Brahmacharya, enlightenment, if you will, that sort of a thing, and kind of get more of a real world look at what it's like, because, the notions of it do tend to be really romanticized. And also, when you read the Brahma Sutras and things like that, if you get off on an emotional, or a romantic tangent about it all, it just becomes quite unrealistic, really. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit. But before we do that, did you look at that web thing on YouTube that I mentioned to you, Scotty? What was it called? Mystery History.
Oh, yeah.
And there's the whole thing you can subscribe to there. And some of them are really good. They go all around the world, and certainly in India and that. And they just talk about the unbelievable accomplishments in ancient architecture that we have no idea how to do today. It's worth looking at. And it's a very, objective. At least a lot of them are just totally objective, straightforward. This is what we've got, and this is the reality of it. So I think it's really worth taking a look at. It's amazing because, they look at ancient Egypt and try to make archaeological discoveries. And I mean, of course, all of that is great. But a lot of it, they talk about how the ancient knowledge is lost, And it isn't, it's not, because all that stuff, how to build a flying saucer even, it's all in the Vedas. But now the thing is that it's all, the Vedas are nature. They're from nature. It's the language of nature. It's not the language of human beings, So I think I've said in a previous podcast, if I took a verse out of Rig Veda and I showed it to a number of different pundits and asked them to translate it, and they all gave very different translations. And it's not because they're mistaken, but it's because reality is I call it a reality continuum. And so, and every word in the Vedic language, in the Sanskrit language, has then different meanings based on whatever level in the reality continuum we're talking about. If it's gross physical level, if it's psychoenergetic level, if it's transcendental level. And so how you translate it, how you interpret it, is going to depend on what angle you're coming from. And so when it comes to a lot of these technologies, we have to be very careful and very meticulous. Sthapatya Veda, how to build an enlightened city. It's not about turning to page 357 of the Rig Veda and following the instructions. It's a very, very, very sophisticated science. But there are people in India, particularly, I'm thinking of a particular individual with respect to Vastu, Vedic architecture, who is his whole life, from the time he's 5 years old, he studied with Ganapati Sthapati, the most recognized Vastu expert in India, who passed away recently. But these are the kind of guys you have to work with and be very rigorous, very meticulous with. And as I've said, he was telling me that nothing like this, what we're planning on building here at Mount Soma, nothing like it exists anywhere in the world. And when he first said it, I remember I was like, gee, there's Tirupati, a Venkateshwara temple, and all these incredible things throughout India. And at first I found it just, how could that possibly be? But then I realized, even if some of them are built, like what's that one in Thailand? I can never remember the name of off the top of my head.
Oh.
Scotty.
In Thailand, or is it in Cambodia?
Cambodia.
Angkor Wat or whatever.
Yeah, Angkor Wat. Yeah. Maybe it was an enlightened city one day. But for one thing, now it's just an ancient ruin. It's not even functional. And for two, I went through the history and talked about how delicate the knowledge is, and how it started out as a Vedic temple, and then one of the kings was Buddhist, so he tried to convert it. And all of a sudden, the technology, even within the Vedic literature, it's like there's a design, if to use an automobile analogy, there's a design for how to build a Volkswagen. There's a design for how to build a Ford. And you can't just take the carburetor out of one and stick it in the other and have it work, because each is a system within itself. And the same thing is the case with respect to Sthapatya Veda. So much of the knowledge has gotten lost or just abused, even though it is there in the Vedic literature. We just have to be really dedicated to understanding it, But it is really amazing, because when you look at it also, there's the very notion of, where the Veda comes from. It's unbelievable. If you watch these, specials or these history documentaries or whatever on India and the knowledge, they'll talk about, oh yeah, well, this part of the Veda was written by so-and-so around 800 AD. I mean, first of all, they weren't written. It's the structure of existence. It's the nature of existence. It's eternal. And it may have been cognized at one point by a particular rishi. But when did it originate? It didn't originate when somebody wrote it. It was always there. So even the most fundamental nature of understanding of what the Veda is, it's really not there. Where did it come from? Maybe somebody will say the rishis, but who are the rishis? Where'd they get it? And people are kind of at a loss. It's cognition. It's taking the physiology and refining it to the point where those subtle impulses of the depth of your being, which is the same as the depth of all existence, because we're one with everything, and where those subtle impulses well up through the physiology in a unique manner, unique to each individual's physiology, each of the rishis' physiologies, to cognize, in other words, to bring forth that aspect of the nature of existence. That's what it is. So the Veda is the language of nature. It's not the language of human beings. It's not the language of man. And so much, we try to, it's like we have a notion of what we think God should be, and it's almost like we expect God to conform to our notion. I mean, nobody would hear that and say, oh, yes, that's what I'm doing. No, they say, oh, no, I'm not doing that. But in fact, it is, really, if you think about it. So the humility with which we receive the knowledge and understand Veda, or strive to understand Veda, it's so elusive and so profound and so delicate. So I wanted to talk a little about moksha, enlightenment, what it is, and maybe even more importantly, in a lot of ways, what it's not. all anybody can do, and this, including me, all I can do is it's speak from my own level of consciousness, my own level of awareness. And like it said, knowledge is structured in consciousness. It's a function of your level of consciousness. And you never, even if a person becomes fully enlightened and attained Brahmi Chaitanya, it's not like they get a USDA stamp. Boom, there you go, you got it. It's not that cut and dry. It's not that simple. And I know there was one saint in India. What did he say? He said, if anybody tells you that they're enlightened, they're not. And there's such a wisdom to that, really, because there's always a higher level of consciousness. There's always a higher level of awareness. And we understand things from whatever our level of awareness is. So when I do my podcast, really all I'm doing is trying to give my perspective, my understanding from my level of awareness, whatever that is, of what it means to be one with something, what it means to be one with the universe, interpreting the Brahma Sutras, interpreting the Upanishads, interpreting the Shiva Sutras. That's all we can do. There was, it's interesting because most of the comments I get to these podcasts aren't written in. It's word of mouth. People call somebody they know who lives here at Mount Soma or somebody who knows me, and they'll tell them, and then it kind of through the grapevine, I hear about it, And somebody, I've actually heard this several times. People will make comments, and some people actually directly to me have said, it's hard to understand these podcasts, when I'm talking about the Brahma Sutras and Shiva Sutras and all that. It's deep stuff, And so this man's really a wonderful man. He's a student. He's been a student for years. I haven't seen him for years, though, but he said that, he's a hard time understanding it all in my podcast. And so it was feedback from another person. I said, do you know why he said that? And he was like, what are you getting at? And I said, it's because he's an honest man, and I said, tell him that, because again, this knowledge is subtle and it's elusive. And I don't know, I call it the I get it syndrome, when people hear something or read a verse out of the Veda and, okay, I get that, like I put with the blog announcement, echoes of truth perceived as truth hold truth at bay. And this is particularly more true of, Scotty, some cultures more than others, and in the West, it's, people are far too quick to say, I get it, and I'm enlightened, and I'm a bodhisattva or what have you. And it's just let all that go, really is a wise approach, So at the same time, when that phase transition occurs into, a state of enlightenment, it's dramatic. I remember one saint in India, somebody was talking about, I understand this whole enlightenment thing and I get it. And, it's not that big a deal, blah, blah. And then the saint just responded to him. He said, if you became enlightened right now, he said, it would bring you to your knees. And that's what it's like. It's overwhelming. It's mind-blowing. And it's not like, all of a sudden, the clouds part and you understand it all. What it is about is that on the deepest levels of existence, it's like there's a level of clarity that occurs. I compare it sometimes to a docking station. If you're in outer space and you're in a little shuttlecraft, like they talk about in, what is that, Star Trek? I think it is. you're in a little shuttlecraft, and there's the mother station, the docking station is there. And so as you approach the shuttlecraft, you're getting kind of sort of maybe understanding it, but you're kind of getting closer, but you're not completely there yet. And you're running just on the battery power of, or whatever it is, the engine of the shuttlecraft itself. And that's kind of like how we're moving towards and evolving, you know. It's a kind of sort of feels like maybe is the really truth of it. It's not about, oh, I get it. But then what happens is you get closer and closer, you know, just like in these sci-fi outer space shows, there's a tractor beam that takes place at some point. So you're so close that the mothership then can kind of lock in, so to speak, to the shuttlecraft. And then then the evolution starts happening more quickly. I compare that to the evolution of species. Human beings, they say that there's a time, I don't know how long ago, when all of a sudden the brain just started to transform and evolve just exponentially faster than it had been. And why is that? Because as the physiology lines up enough, as it aligns enough with the real nature of existence, it gets to the point where it's resonating so much with it that it's almost like the tractor beam happens. It starts to get pulled. It's so close that gravity really takes over, you see? And so then, then that moment happens when it locks in, it clicks. And that, you know, the shuttlecraft plugs into the mothership. And that's the moment of, you know, what they call enlightenment, or when you attain Brahmachetana. But keep in mind, and this is a really important point, that's on the deepest level of a person's being. But there are all these different levels of being. There's the transcendental level. There's the deepest feeling level. Then there's the psychological levels, and then there's the energetic levels, and even the physical level, you know, more superficial. And the mind is very much influenced in a physiological sense, and determined by what, you know, and I've talked about that, a chit, the storehouse of impressions, the subconscious mind. And that's a karmic thing. It's a physiological thing. So even after, to continue with the analogy, even after you plug into the docking station, the mind has a long way to go. I know I was talking to Punit about, I was telling him what I think, and he said, yeah, he said, that's the hardest part. You know, to get your mind where you're thinking in a manner that's in harmony with the very depth of existence. It's one thing to be locked in on that deepest level. It's another thing through all these different permutations and fluctuations, or what have you, the vrittis, if you will, the influences on the mind. So much happens before the mind itself actually aligns with that transcendental depth of one's being. And so that's the point, is that even after a person has attained Brahmachetana, they're enlightened. All that stuff I talked about in the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras and the Shiva Sutras, even after that's attained, the mind still has a long way to go. And if it's an invaluable experience if you have the opportunity to actually be around somebody that is truly enlightened. And their problem with that is, how do you know? I mean, how do people determine who they think is enlightened? Person that aligns with their preconceived notions, what they think about it now. And so there's a global consciousness that's pretty crude, you know, and you know, the fishbowl is dirty, you know, and so the global consciousness is distorted. And so when people do go out and look for an enlightened master, a guru, or whatever, it's based on the global distortions, which is largely Hollywood's notion of what it means to be enlightened, which is ridiculous, right? But now here's where it gets really funny because, okay, they talk about, for example, freedom from desire. When you're an enlightened being, you're free from desire. Well, that's what they're talking about there, is that the very depth of your being, that transcendental, you're awake to that level that can desire nothing because you're already one with it. You're already one with everything. How can you desire anything if you already have it? But people manipulate their thinking. I know there was this one person that was into Buddhism, and she was saying, well, if you point a gun at me right now, it doesn't matter because I have no desire. I'm unattached, and that's not the way it is. And if you're around truly enlightened people, you'll see that's not the way it is. They have their emotions. They have their ups and downs. They talk about freedom from suffering. And people get a notion of that and they hang on to it to a point where, like, oh, well, when they're, nailing Jesus to the cross, he wasn't suffering because he's free from suffering. That's not the way it works. Believe me, he suffered. If you look at the lives of a lot of these saints, and they suffered, and in fact, you see, positive attracts negative. And so that's why a lot of these saints and enlightened people, what do? They go live in a cave in the Himalayas just to get away from people, really, because the negativity, that's how it manifests. That's how it emerges, is from people with their projections and their preconceived notions and their judgments. And so we have a dilemma here, though, because when a person is enlightened, they have a lot of Shakti. They have a lot of energy, positive energy, and that's very attractive. I don't know. I get the thing in my mind just this moment, where you get the moth and it's attracted to the light, and it buzzes around the light. But if it gets too close to the light, it starts to get singed, sunburned, even zapped, And so see, the life of an enlightened person is dealing with that. They attract people. The people are attracted to all the energy, all the Shakti, all the wisdom even. But at the same time, the closer they get, the hotter it gets in the kitchen, the closer they get to the sun, and they get burnt. And what do? They get angry, they get negative. And it's, where's it directed? It's directed at the saint, at the guru, and that's just physics, really. It's just mechanics, Is that all making sense, Scotty?
Sure.
Yeah. But see, there is a thing beyond brahmacharya, Chiranjeevi. It's like, and that's immortal. But what does it mean to be immortal? It doesn't necessarily mean an immortal physical body, but it does mean that person's mind is living in such harmony with the transcendental depth of being. You see, it's a very highly evolved state of being beyond brahmacharya, where the mind itself is complete harmony with nature. But there we're talking about the Sapta Rishis, the cosmic forces and the personified correlates to the stars of the Dipper, for example, So that's a very, very high level of state before, those sorts of principles are lived on, freedom from suffering, freedom from desire, all that on the most, on a daily life level, you see.
Now, Michael, question.
Yeah.
You've talked in the past how, all there is consciousness, right? And now, as consciousness moves through the universe and is manifest in each individual, has their own, like, consciousness, right?
Yeah.
You have your consciousness, I have mine, everybody has theirs. Now, they drop the physical body, that consciousness, does it keep that individuality, or does it go back to the oneness of pure consciousness?
Well, if we're talking about between incarnations, there's a fundamental jiva value, a fundamental individuality value that's maintained. But in that process, there's a forgetting also. That's why people don't remember their past lives, for example, or maybe just have some glimpses. But the individuality is maintained. But the thing is, in the state of immortality, in the sense that we're talking about it now, that doesn't happen. You can drop a body and pick up another one. I mean, it's something that's essentially incomprehensible until you're living at that state, and that is so far beyond me. That what is that even like? Because see, here's the thing too. We are living in Kali Yuga. We're living in the age of ignorance. There's that global consciousness. The fishbowl is polluted, but in the state of Brahman Chaitanya, you are everything. You're one with everything, and so that limitation is there in the physiology. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
And so they, that
like
so they say
it's in the vehicle. It's not in the consciousness. It's the
right.
Yeah.
Right. How do we say that? You're an enlightened person is living in a house of mud, whereas the gods are living in, if you will, are living in a house of crystal, of glass. You see, and so it can be argued, how come that enlightened people can't fly through the air and do all the supernatural powers that are described in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras? The environment's too polluted, for one thing, even if a person is at that level. The environment's too polluted.
Well, that goes back to some of those ancient things that you're talking about that they were able to do too, right? Like I was just watching a thing about, like, there's a rock, or there's some rocks that are in Egypt that are 1,000 tons, and they moved them like 500 miles or something.
Yeah, well, some of that can be a function of a person's level of consciousness. Another way it can be done is just a technology that we're not aware of yet.
Right. Yeah. But,
yeah. And the thing, they say life is bliss. It's all bliss. When you're enlightened, it's a bliss consciousness. Well, that bliss again is at the depth of your being, and on the surface, particularly when you're engaged in daily life in the world of wanting, in the world of Kali Yuga negativity, really, so much of it. The bliss is there, deep hidden inside, but your attention is on the fact that, people are killing each other. Use the analogy of Christ again. Yeah, life is bliss, but he wasn't in bliss when they were nailing him to the cross. I mean, that's ridiculous. It was there in his physiology, deep and hidden. But see, that's why you can understand then, why an enlightened individual just wants to go off and be in a cave or treasure so much time alone, because and particularly like late at night or early in the morning, 2 a.m, what have you, the environment is more settled, and so there's less imposition, and so that facilitates the resting into that bliss that's eternally there, the depth of being, and that an enlightened individual has the capacity to just rest with and be with. It's bliss, bliss is having, when the physiology, the psychology, all the different levels of a person's being are aligned with that transcendental depth of existence. That, and why? Because that's a source where, A and E come together. That's, in other words, that's a source where the duality, the separation, the multiplicity, and the exquisiteness of oneness are directly experienced. You could say it that way. And that's bliss. That's harmony, infinite harmony. You see? Is that all making sense, Scotty?
Yeah. I think it's important maybe for us to talk about too, how, like, it is Kali Yuga, if we're wanting, like, as a society, things to be different in terms of, God, everything should just be peace and harmony and all that, right? Well, yeah, it should. But right now we're in Kali Yuga where, it's raining. So we have to put jackets on. We have to prepare for, like, it not to be easy, and I think that's where a lot of the problem comes from, is that, like, what you talk about sometimes, where you try to put what happens in another age onto what's actually happened now.
In Sat Yuga,
Yeah,
all the people are living their dharma. They're all living life seamlessly merged with the depth of existence. It's a completely different, almost incomprehensible to us now. But in this age, when there's so much stress and it's Kali Yuga, it's the age of ignorance. Negativity dwells within people, and aspiring to create world peace without addressing that most fundamental reality is an exercise in futility. I mean, we keep trying to get rid of wars and wars. We all want peace and everything. Another war crops up, another war crops up. Why is that? The fishbowl's polluted. That's all there is to it. It's just that simple, And yeah, we do our best to create laws and try to create world peace. Of course we do. We do our best. But it's never going to really ultimately work. The global consciousness needs to get purified, period. And it's a subtle knowledge,
yeah.
Swami Uttananda had a fun quote. He said, if you don't like your personality, you better change it now, because after you're enlightened, you won't care. It's easily misunderstood. I mean, that can be interpreted on so many different levels, But we have a notion of what we're going to be when we're enlightened. And we're not like that. Even when we're enlightened, we won't be like that, because it's a preconceived notion. It's based on a fallacy, an idealized notion, an ice cream cone in the sky. And we inspire that. And we aspire to that. And that's why I think it was him that said that, if you spend your life going after self-improvement, all you have to show for it at the end of your life is an improved self. In other words, all you've done is manipulate your behavior to conform to your preconceived notion of what it means to be a good person. An echo of truth, just an echo of truth. Echoes of truth, perceived as truth, hold truth at bay. So, sadly, the most popular spiritual teachers in the world today are what? They're ones that have a teaching and a behavioral pattern that conforms to the global consciousness at the time. They cater to it. They actually play to it. And they can be very well intended, but at the same time, it's a very cruel sort of teaching, because you're pushing people in a direction that's just not real. It's not really where emancipation comes from, what emancipation is like. And so you have people striving in a direction that this teacher or whatever is telling them to strive in the direction of. and at best, it's a it's not. I don't even want to use the phrase "at best," but it's an opiate, and so then religion, spirituality becomes an opiate of the masses, and oh, what a mess, it's a mess. So the point here is we need to have a fundamental understanding, and hopefully that in this podcast is what we're getting, a fundamental understanding of how life is working, what's going on. Yes, the Upanishads are there. Yes, the Brahma Sutras are there. Yes, the Shiva Sutras are there. Yes, it's incredibly profound knowledge, but it's going to be understood based on the level of consciousness of the individual. And also, when it talks about these fundamental principles like life is bliss, freedom from desire, that's not going to be lived on the surface of life in Kali Yuga. It's just not. So we have to proceed wisely, and we have to proceed carefully in our lives, And I remember there was this one guy, I felt so bad for him. This was way back 20 years or more. He was a student. And he put up his hand at one point and he says, I don't want to have to try. I just want life to be easy and like that. And we all aspire to that, but it takes dedication. We have to create that kind of environment for ourselves the best we can, realizing that it's Kali Yuga, And one other big warning here is that kind of thing, if we let it go too wild, it becomes escapism. We just don't want to disconnect from the world and, just kind of float through and get by and avoid any kind of confrontation or not engage in life. And that's a form of denial. It's burying your head in the sand, what is that one phrase? You can't get over it. You can't get under it. You can't go around it. You got to go through the door. We evolve by moving through. And so for that reason, Kali Yuga, we're very fortunate to be in Kali Yuga in one sense, because it's that dynamic and it's moving through that we have the opportunity to evolve so quickly. It's a little bit like, spitting out a watermelon seed. When the pressure is great, the watermelon seed takes off. And so in Kali Yuga, when the pressure is great, if we are careful and we're attentive and discerning, and don't get lost in tangents or opiates of one form or another, spiritual teachings that are just opiates, that kind of thing, then if we're really diligent about it, we can really evolve most quickly in Kali Yuga, you see. The enlightened, they long to share what they know. But the reality is there's a component to enlightenment that's just horribly lonely. Because you love people, you see people, and you're so full of love, and you want to help, but they can't hear you, and then they even get mad at you for the reasons we were talking about. And so you just keep trying. I've used the analogy before. It's like if you're a little kid on the beach and they're all playing and, and they're pretending like, oh, somewhere there's a treasure chest of gold, so they go with their sticks and they turn over rocks on the beach and everybody's looking for their gold. And if one little kid all of a sudden goes into a cave and boom, there's the treasure chest full of gold, what does he do? Does he want to just sit there with the gold? No. He wants to run out of that cave and say, hey, you guys, I found it. Here's the gold. Come on. And if they just all look at him and kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, yeah, no, you don't know what you're talking about. That's painful, The enlightened are misunderstood, and they're judged by the mentality of global consciousness in Kali Yuga now. And that's just the way it works, you know. So that's why that one expression is so good. It's actually Chinese, I think. They say, better to spend a long time looking for the right master than any time at all with the wrong one. So you have to be discerning, and you can't have an idealized notion and then look for somebody who conforms to that and say you found a teacher. You have to look deeper. There's that little book I wrote. Remember, Scotty, look deeper to live better, or something like that. Look deeper and live better. You have to look deeper. You have to think. You have to think, you know. All right. Anything else, Scotty?
No, that was good.
Okay. Hopefully that helps. And our relation, so much of it is about relationship with. And even our relationship with the Brahma Sutras, our relationship with, and we're talking about Devata value there, aren't we? Relationship with all the different scriptures. It needs to be healthy. And always remember that humility is the flip side of wisdom. Okay, I guess that's it for now. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk more again.